Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday webinars. This is an initiative of the European Foundation Center. My name is Andrea Salvadori. I'm the Professional Development Officer here in Brussels at the European Foundation Center. And today we are talking about education and philanthropy. What should European universities teach? Before we start, there is a couple of housekeeping explanations that I would like to give you. Most of you will have this window open on your screen. As I told you, you will all be muted, so even those of you who have a microphone will not be able to speak until we allow you to do so. You have a button here that will allow you to attract our attention, and you have a questions box, a question window. You can type questions at any time throughout the presentation, and I will be asking them on your behalf to today's speakers. So please do not hesitate to type in any questions at any point. If you have any problems, feel free to ask. Let's have a look at what is going on over the course of the next hour. As I was telling you, my name is Andrea Salvadori, and I work at the European Foundation Center. We have two fantastic guests today, Charles Keaton and Michiel de Wilde, who will be giving two perspectives of the situation of philanthropy education in Europe, and we'll have time for a little bit of a discussion towards the end between, of course, the two speakers, but also we hope that you will be participating and you'll be sending in lots of questions. To start the webinar, we actually have a couple of questions for you that we would like you to let us know what your opinion is. The first one is more for our guests to understand who we are talking to, and the question is the following. You should be able to see it on your screen. Did you, in your past, or are you still currently following a course of study directly linked to the field of philanthropy? Is it yes or is it no? You can vote directly on your screen, so we should be able to have all of your votes in. We're going to leave you a couple of extra minutes. Just click directly on your screen, and we'll see the result in a minute. So most of you have voted, and we are going to close it. Well, actually, none of you have. You should be able to see the results now. None of you have followed the course, so this is very interesting for you, Charles, for later. None of you have studied something that is directly linked to the field of philanthropy. Now, one more question that we have for you, which is directly linked to the topic of this webinar today. What is, in your opinion, the purpose of philanthropy education in Europe or across the world? Is it A, to promote skills? Is it to promote scholarship? Or is it a bit of both? Feel free to let us know what you think, whether philanthropy should be taught at university to promote the skills of people who will be working in philanthropy, or if it is to promote the knowledge and the research behind this field, or if it should be aimed at both. So once again, all of you have voted, and let me share the results with you. Well, as you see, we're a bit torn here. Most of you think that promoting the skills of of the philanthropy sector is an important component, but some of you do think that it's important for philanthropy to be taught as a way to promote the knowledge and the scholarship around it. Well, there's been extensive research done by our next speaker, Charles Keaton. Charles is a philanthropy practice research fellow at City University of London. Before this current role, Charles has served as the first director of the London-based Pearce Foundation between 2004 and 2012. And in his position, he worked with the British philanthropist Trevor Pearce, who, and together with him, they led a professional team in areas ranging from citizenship and identity to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At that same time, Charles was also co-authoring and editing the Family Foundation's Given Trends, which was a source of data and analyses which succeeded in bringing the attention to philanthropy, to family philanthropy in the UK back on the map. Both in 2013 and 2014, Charles worked as a visiting scholar at the Stanford University in the US, and particularly at the Stanford University's Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, where he co-taught theories of civil society, philanthropy, and the nonprofit sector. In his future, he is working on the creation of a new school of philanthropy in London, which he may or may not be giving us any revelation on today. We'll see about that. But he recently published a detailed research on philanthropy education in the UK and continental Europe, and we've invited him today to tell us a little bit more about the research that he has run. So, Charles, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today. Tell us a little bit more. Why this research? Where did the idea come from? What did you particularly look at? How? And what were the results? I'm going to hand you over the microphone and the control of the screen, so you can tell us everything about it.
Great, and thank you. Before I start, I just want to check that my slides are available, because I'm going to talk using a few slides just to talk through the process. So just wanted to check that they're available to you and participants on the seminar.
You're not seeing them yet, so
hopefully they'll come up. Well, in the meantime, I will just to answer your question, and also before I do so, to thank you for the invitation to come and participate in this seminar. It's a real pleasure to be talking to colleagues across Europe and to be in conversation with you and Michiel. So the idea really came about because as a practitioner at the London-based Pearce Foundation, I'd grown interested but also concerned about the gap between the world of practitioners and academics. And as a practitioner, I was concerned that we were adopting the best possible practices in the conduct of our philanthropic spending. And also were thoughtful and reflective about how we made choices about using the resources that we were privileged to have at our disposal for the public good. And it was in that context that I started visiting and talking to members of the few academic centers on philanthropy that existed both in Europe and the US. Subsequently, after leaving the Pearce Foundation at the end of 2012, after almost a decade, I took up, as you mentioned, a position at Stanford University as a visiting scholar where I was teaching about philanthropy. And that really piqued my interest in what was happening in the American academic landscape. And with that in mind, and with my role at City University, there were discussions about maybe doing some research on what the European landscape of philanthropy looked like. And that led to a collaboration with Professor Kathy Ferrer at City University at Cass Business School's Centre on Giving and Philanthropy, and Tobias Young, who is at St Andrews University, to embark on a research project, which was funded with a small legacy grant by the Diana Princess of Wales Memorial Fund.
Charles, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We are not currently seeing your slides. I wonder whether you can maybe show your screen and show your application with the rest of us so that we can follow with you.
Sure, I'll do my best to do so. They are up on my screen, so I'm not quite sure whether they're not up at yours, but I'm looking.
There you go. Now we can see them. Very
Super.
well.
So what I've basically done is just talk briefly through the first slide, and I'll try and move to the next ones now. So that, as I said, was the background to the research. But I think what would be best really would be to get stuck into the research itself. And what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is just talk you through the research questions, spend a little bit of time on the methods that I adopted for the research, which were not uncomplicated given some of the challenges around how one defines and understands philanthropy in a context as heterogeneous as Europe. And then talk a little bit about the research findings and some of the questions that it raises. And I know Mikhail will be responding with his own perspectives from his vantage point after that. So the main aim of the research was to understand the countries, the institutions, the disciplines, and the levels at which philanthropy is being taught across European universities. So what is the scale and scope of the teaching about philanthropy at European universities today? And then building on that, conducted some semi-structured interviews to look at the perceptions for the rationale for philanthropy education. You touched upon it in your introduction. What is the purpose? Is it skills? Is it for scholarship in itself, or a combination of the two? And also ask questions about the barriers to the growth and development of the field at this interesting moment. So just operationalizing the terms, which I wanted to do in order to be as clear as possible about the definition that I was using. We really adopted the definition from the European Research Network on Philanthropy, or ERNOP, and which was influenced by a philanthropic practitioner and scholar called Michael Payton Bob Payton in the US. And we defined philanthropy education as a study or training about the history, theory, or practice of private contributions of money and other resources with a primary goal to benefit the public good. But for the purpose of this research, we excluded time and volunteering to make the research more manageable in scope. And we might want to come back to that during the course of the discussion. In terms of the methods that I adopted, I reviewed various public listings, including ERNOP, which I've mentioned, the BENPI database, which was a collaboration between Indiana University and Bologna University, and one or two others back in 2006 or 7. At Seton Hall University in America, there was a very interesting database of non-profit management education programs, which was the dominant frame in America, which gave me some methodological clues as well. And in the UK, where voluntary sector studies is, if you like, one of the more dominant frames, I looked at their networks, which includes listings on courses which really have philanthropy included. I also looked at the websites of various philanthropy centers, including Mikhail's one over in Rotterdam, and it turns out there are several others. And from that, I was able to contact over 40 academic informants across Europe, some of whom may be participating now, and in addition, search key terms, including not just philanthropy, but also foundations, giving, and related terms, in order to gather information from multiple listing sources and languages to make sure I had as much of a picture as possible. And in the event, I was able to gather data on 20 countries, 18 of which were in the European Union and 2, Norway and Switzerland, outside. So whilst it's not a complete picture, I hope that my research was able to capture quite a fair number of countries within the European Union and within Europe more generally. But as I said, I'd like to just dwell a little bit upon the data gathering challenges, particularly in a conversation which is pan-European, as opposed to British or American or elsewhere. And that's just to say there is no single source of data on philanthropy. As I say, it's been collected from different sources and in different languages. There are other challenges, including the consistency of the definitions and meanings of philanthropy that vary across place as well as across time, but in place being the relevant factor here. And because I focus so much on definitions around philanthropy, there is a smaller data capture than maybe if we'd have focused on wider non-profit or foundation, or non-profit or voluntary sector programs. We focus more on philanthropy foundations. So those were some of the challenges, and in addition, the interviews that we conducted were more focused on the UK. But notwithstanding those shortcomings and those challenges, and the fact that the research was exploratory in nature and fairly new, we have some interesting findings that I wanted to share with you in the remaining moments. So first of all, we found that 11 out of 20 countries surveyed offered some university-based philanthropy education provision. And that provision could be either at a postgraduate or undergraduate level, or it could be in the form of executive education and professional training. As you can see on the third bullet point, there are 20 unique course modules and 16 professional training courses that we found. There may be more. Those are the ones that we were able to capture at the point at which we collected the data, which was at the beginning of this year and the end of last year. That provision covered 23 higher education institutions, and we found actually 9 academic centres, most of which were established after 2000, including the respondent in this discussion at ERASMUS, which is an interesting phenomenon reflecting the growth of academic centres across Europe, and we can talk about the potential in terms of interaction and collaboration that creates. We also found some academic chairs in philanthropy, 2 of them, and some master's courses, a limited number of master's courses where philanthropy was either the sole focus of the subject or was a core component of the course. We looked at this question by academic discipline, and we found that there was a bias towards focus on philanthropy education being situated in business and management disciplines. As you can see, 8 plus 3 in economics, less in other social science disciplines and the arts, but by no means non-existent. And I think there's an interesting question raised from that finding around what places or what disciplinary settings should philanthropy be taught in, because the disciplinary setting in which philanthropy is taught will shape the content or the questions asked and the knowledge that is produced. So that's definitely something worth further discussion. As for the interviews, and as I say, I qualify this by my reference to this being more focused on the UK, I did conduct some semi-structured interviews with a cross-section of foundation directors and philanthropy advisors, including several who had served or were serving or are serving in senior roles in British foundations that are investing in higher education, so those with an interest in funding of that area. I also talked to university representatives, from vice-chancellors to fundraising officers, and I talked to those that are actually teaching courses which were on philanthropy or in which philanthropy has a core role to play. And I focused on the role of philanthropy in society and the implications that had for teaching about philanthropy. And I looked at, with my interviewees, about the content of philanthropy education, so what should actually be taught and what were the challenges. And these were the findings from those interviews, that there was a recognition, first of all, of a growing role of philanthropy in public services, at least in the UK, including in higher education. As many of you will know, philanthropy into British higher education has significantly increased and is forecast to increase up to £2 billion a year by 2022, which is a sizable target. It remains to be seen whether it will be reached, but there's definitely an aspiration amongst university leaderships for more philanthropy, as there is in other areas of public provision. But with that became a sense that there's a need for more systematic research and teaching on the subject to build a knowledge base. And when one is building a knowledge base about a subject, universities, whilst not exclusively, while they don't have an exclusive role to play, clearly have an important one. And that was something that many respondents picked up on. In terms of the content of philanthropy education, there were divisions between those that felt it was best to be rooted in a business school discipline, maybe answering very practical questions about venture philanthropy or strategy or leadership or governance, and those that maybe raised questions about it being more situated in public policy. So questions about maybe the tax treatment of charitable foundations could be relevant. And there are other views as well. In addition, there was a perception amongst some respondents that there should be an emphasis on vocational skills and training so that the next generations and the current generations of foundation practitioners are given the tools or supported to be given the tools to do their jobs better. Certainly something that didn't exist when I took up my position at the Pears Foundation in 2004. But others that actually felt, including on the foundation side, that that would narrow the scope of philanthropy education in a way that maybe would lose some of the more reflective questions that one may ask, such as the relationship between philanthropy and social justice, say. And then also, interestingly, on the content of philanthropy education, there was a set of questions and answers about student philanthropy. And that was a phenomenon that has really surged in the US. So I just want to spend a moment talking about it. And that is courses in which students are given up to $100,000 to distribute to charities as part of their experience of learning about philanthropy. I myself was involved in one such course at Stanford University, but there's many, many more funded by philanthropists in America, including Buffett-related philanthropy, Jeff Rayner and the Once Upon a Time Foundation, and also the Arriaga Andreessen philanthropies over in Silicon Valley, and with the support of university leaderships in many cases. And that has really been quite a phenomenon in the US. In the European context, many respondents said that they found that prospect tantalizing, but noted that it didn't exist and may be very expensive to implement and wanted to see more evidence of its efficacy. And interestingly, there is an academic literature emerging in America about the efficacy of giving students those amounts of money to distribute in a supervised way, and I'm happy to talk more about that. There were some barriers and opportunities identified by the respondents. University leaderships typically seem to, according to the responses we had, see philanthropy more in instrumental terms as a source of funding for their university, as opposed to more of a focus on it as a subject of scholarship. In addition, scholars themselves pointed out that the subject was not internally embedded or valued sufficiently or defined, lacking academic incentives such as peer-reviewed journals, as well as maybe the disciplinary routines. There was a question about the extent to which demand is proven or unproven, and maybe that's something that we'll only know in time. And in addition, there was a point about philanthropic funding of this area. As many of you will know, this hasn't necessarily been an area that has attracted support or great interest from philanthropies themselves, although there are some notable exceptions. And traditionally there has been a limited interest, but that may be changing. And if it does, is that desirable? Is that going to change some of the conversations with universities around funding in general? And could there even be some conflicts that would need to be overcome or addressed, whilst in general maybe the thrust being desirable to see more interest in investment? And finally, there were some opportunities noted for universities in investing in this area. First of all, in terms of advancing academic knowledge about philanthropy being an obvious one, but also about advancing the skills of development and fundraising staff. We haven't talked about them yet, but they are a big community of people working in universities seeking to raise funds, and anything that provides them with a deeper understanding of philanthropy and tools related to that may be something that will be attractive to universities as they seek to develop their fundraising workforce. And finally, some respondents reported how having provision around philanthropy actually enhance potentially their relationships with philanthropic donors. So this is my final slide before I hand back, and these are just some questions that have been in my mind which we may want to talk about, and that is philanthropy education and philanthropy studies. That's one frame that I used and we used in this research, but there are others that characterize the space between the state and the market. Voluntary sector studies in the UK, third sector education more broadly, non-profit management education in America, and those with a more finance base, social economy, investment and entrepreneurship. So that that frame, the conceptual frame, is a relevant consideration. The considerations around the disciplinary setting are also relevant. Questions around why there's regional variations. In our research, we discovered that there was more concentration of philanthropy education provision in Western European countries, such as the Netherlands, the UK, Germany and France, than there were in other places. And there could be some interesting exploration around that, and some good reasons for it as well. And also there's this uncertainty around potential for student philanthropy and how that may actually change some of the dynamics around this whole question. So with that, I'm going to hand back to you, Andrea, and look forward to continuing the discussion in this webinar and beyond.
Well, thank you very much. And it's been really a very interesting presentation. I have a few questions already, and I do invite all of you listening to send in your questions if you have anything. But I would like to actually hand over the word to somebody who is, as you already mentioned briefly, deeply involved in and who comes from one of these centers, and we've invited Michiel de Wilde to share his experience with us. Michiel is the executive director of the ERASMUS Center for Strategic Philanthropy in the Netherlands. We've had the pleasure of working with Michiel no longer than a couple of months ago, and I hope Michiel will spend a couple of minutes telling about our common experience. Michiel has had a variety of experiences in the profit and not-for-profit sector. He was the director of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Actually, it's a National Committee of the Netherlands, so the Dutch branch of IUCN. He was the director of Farm Access Foundation, a Dutch not-for-profit organization that is dedicated to strengthening health system in sub-Saharan Africa. He was with the Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam, Aid Environment. Previously to join the non-for-profit sector, he, and I found out this much to my surprise, he was the owner of an organic chocolate production and retail company. He was, even before that, he was working with McKinsey. He's currently still very active on many boards, supervisor and advisory boards of foundations and not-for-profit organizations. But we've invited him as the executive director of the ERASMUS Center for Strategic Philanthropy. Michiel, I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, and I would like you to tell us a little bit more about ECSP and its role. But also, I would like you to share with us your opinion on and your impressions after listening to Charles' presentation. The floor is yours.
Hi, Andrea, and hi to everybody who's listening in and will participate in the discussion later on. First of all, I should check whether you are seeing my screen. Andrea, is the first slide on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you for inviting me to provide a perspective from daily life, or from the trenches, as you might say, as we represent one of those 9 centers that Charles already mentioned. And also thanks to Charles for doing this research, because it touches on many subjects that are part of our daily life and that we are thinking about very hard and sometimes struggling with. So it provides us with some really interesting input into that. So we are one of the 9 centers that are mentioned in the study. And what I will do is first introduce the ERASMUS Center for Strategic Philanthropy. And while I do that, I will try to touch upon a number of the things that Charles has mentioned in his study, both in terms of challenges and in terms of opportunities. And towards the end of the presentation, I will provide, hopefully, some further personal reflection, and I will pose a number of questions to Charles that may help us kickstart the discussion afterwards. So the ERASMUS Center for Strategic Philanthropy was launched in 2010, and in the statutes it says it was launched to enhance the performance and effectiveness of philanthropy. And in those first few years, it was looking at things like volunteering, impact measurement of NGOs, upscaling, a number of subjects that are all important to philanthropic organizations. But on the other hand, we also concluded a year ago, 2 years ago, that the center also suffered a little bit from what Charles calls paradigm confusion. And I'll tell, later on I'll tell a little bit more about how we solved that. It was founded by 3 parties, ERASMUS Foundation, one of the leading Dutch family foundations, and the schools of economics and the Rotterdam School of Management at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. So on our supervisory board we have 3 parties, the 2 schools representing the university and the ERASMUS Foundation. And the founder of the ERASMUS Foundation, who's called Gerard van Vliet, an entrepreneur who became wealthy, decided to dedicate his fortune to philanthropy, and he created the ERASMUS Foundation. And after a few years he also decided that he wanted to provide input and support to the sector, and that's how he came to launch the Erasmus Center for Strategic Philanthropy at his own alma mater, where he studied. So, like I said, we suffered a little bit from paradigm confusion. What was the center all about? So we reflected on that a year and a half ago, and I was part of that from the periphery as a board member of ERASMUS. And we determined that the focus should be much clearer, and we decided to turn it into a learning and knowledge center for European non-grant-seeking foundations. And what does that mean? Within the broad philanthropy sector, and there are many different definitions of it, we have chosen independent foundations as our target audience. So the center is about collecting information and developing new knowledge, which is the knowledge part of the center, but most of all turning that knowledge and that information into practitioner-oriented materials, which is the learning part. What maybe sets us apart from other centers is that we are independent, an independent foundation ourselves, but we are located on the Erasmus campus, and this is to facilitate access to what we hope are thought leaders in various academic disciplines. First of all, of course, the School of Economics and the Rotterdam School of Management, but we are also looking at the schools of history, philosophy, other social sciences, and we've even expanded our range now in looking at collaboration with other universities. So we can look at other universities in the Netherlands and, of course, within Europe for academic collaboration. Our mission, coming from all this, is to support, stimulate, and challenge European foundations in realizing their full potential for societal benefit. And the thought behind that is that we think that philanthropic foundations can be real catalysts in initiating social change and playing a part in social change and helping to solve societal issues, and that it would be really worthwhile if we could help create a center that supports foundations in accomplishing that objective. Having read and studied the study that was done by David Carrington and that Charles also refers to in 2009, we have a secondary objective, which is to help build that vital philanthropy learning ecosystem that's mentioned in the study. And to us, it means creating real linkages with practitioners. It also means creating linkages with other academic centers, but it also means creating linkages with other organizations that are looking at government or at the private sector, such as, for example, the Venture Philanthropy, the European Venture Philanthropy Association, or the World Business Council, other organizations that have research in their objectives and that we could cooperate with to do joint research projects. Where are we now? Again, what makes us different is that we are a team of 4 people that are non-academic. And we found our academic resources and our support within the university and other universities. We have 2 associated professors, formally associated to the center, and we provide the funding of 30% of their positions. Lucas Meijs, who is a professor of volunteering, and he's a specialist in upscaling and working with volunteering organizations, and Dinant Webbing, who is a professor of policy evaluation, and he's a specialist in social experiments, in determining the the impact, evidence-based impact of interventions. And there's ongoing research on upscaling, impact measurement, and volunteerism. We also have relationships with a number of PhD students, and one of them, for example, is getting her PhD degree towards the end of the year, and she's looking at the governance of organizations in the nonprofit sector. And an important group in the study are foundations, and we partly fund that. And we have friendly associations as we develop further with academics and other centers on campus. For example, I just came back from a meeting with the Partnership Resource Center, and we discussed opportunities to collaborate on a study that we may do in the corporate sector and a study that we may do in the government sector. And they all revolve about the potential of philanthropy to be a good partner of the corporate sector and of the government sector. What we try to do is develop a distinctive development and learning approach, which has a number of components. First is an interdisciplinary approach to philanthropy. So although we are an example of a center that is located in the business and economics schools, we very surely look at philosophy, history, law, and other social sciences to think about the philanthropy and where it should go. We always try to have a mix of academics and practitioner speakers in the classroom. And one of the examples I'll touch on later on of how we do that. So always have the academic perspective and the practitioner perspective when we present to a group of students or people from foundations. We try to create as much opportunity for peer-to-peer learning and exchange as we can, because that's a signal that's coming to us very clearly from the sector. The opportunity, whether it's on a board level or a director level or a program manager level, to exchange with peers is found to be very interesting. We look at competence-oriented learning. So although we value research and we value the broad perspective very much, I think because we are very much focused on a target audience, we are looking at competence-oriented learning, and this is about the how-to question versus issue-oriented or thematic learning. And what we will try to do more and more in the near future is look at cases, real-life examples, and use the case method, as they do, for example, in American business schools. We have two programs at the moment, non-accredited professional training programs, and one, and Andrea referred to it, is called the Summer Academy. It's a 3-day program we do once a year with the European Foundation Center. It's for European Foundation staff. They come together, about 25, 30 persons in Rotterdam, and we do a number of modules with them, for example, on upscaling or strategy and impact, or on risk management. And like I said, we bring in an academic speaker from the Erasmus University, and we bring in 1 or 2 representatives from European foundations. They present a case related to the module, and then we have work groups where people get the opportunity to study the subject further, discuss it, and exchange experiences.
And
we have, which is another interesting.
Sorry to interrupt you, Michiel. I just wanted to point out that we actually just had a meeting about this, and we already started working on next year's program, and we look forward to seeing a lot of you in next year's Summer Academy.
A very good point, Andrea, because one of the things we agreed on that we should start the promotion of this beautiful program as early as we can, because we think it's really interesting and we really welcome participants. The second example, which is an example of inter-university cooperation, is what we do with the EU University, or the Free University in Amsterdam. And it's a post-academic program, and we call it Governing Philanthropic Foundations. And it's an 8-day program covering 4 modules, and it helps starting, aspiring board members and new board members in coming to grips with their new responsibilities when they are on the board of a foundation. And what we are now working on is a number of projects in the area of education, and they're all in the field of professional training programs. We're thinking about a core curriculum for foundations that covers the 10 or 12 essential elements of managing an effective foundation. We're looking at a program for high net worth individuals, which are thinking about the whole question about asset management, impact investing, up until becoming an effective philanthropist. And the third program that we are considering is for what we call our secondary target audience, the stakeholders around the foundation sector, accountants, family offices, and policymakers, to help them understand what philanthropy is all about and how they can work effectively with foundations.
Michiel, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes.
One important thing
for
yeah,
questions at the end.
I'm wrapping up. One quick look at this exhibit illustrates our bridging role between academia and practice, and that fits with our position as an independent center. What it says is that they're academics and practitioners. They have both needs and they have things to offer. Of course, we should never forget that academics need to be able to publish in academic journals, and they need interesting research opportunities, and practice can provide that. But our role will be to translate that research into relevant materials that will help practitioners become more effective in what they do. Like I said, there are a number of activities that are key to our center. First and foremost, research, because that's where new knowledge will come from. We help to translate that into training and education programs, but we also would like to translate that into advisory services. And underneath all this is our role to help build a platform and a network where knowledge can be disseminated and exchanged. And all this in very close interaction with practitioners. So what are our next steps and challenges? I'll go through them rapidly. One is positioning the foundation sector as an interesting research subject for academics. It's not always clear to the academics that we work with that there's a real interesting field that they can focus on and apply their knowledge about partnerships or governance with these things. We need to expand our flexible range of national and international academic partners. We are looking at developing non-accredited learning modules, and we need to really understand the learning needs of different target groups. We would like to apply innovative learning approaches like blended learning, massive open source programs, simulations, and another important one, and I highlighted the 2 key ones. One is positioning the foundation sector as interesting to academics, and the other key one is deciding on the feasibility of under- or postgraduate degree programs on philanthropy. This is a decision we will need to take in the next 12 to 24 months because it really requires a dedication and a long-term commitment from the Erasmus University. So there are clearly a number of interesting challenges and decisions we need to take. And then finally, my reflection, of course, the mapping is a great help to us in reinforcing our academic network. Of course, we knew most of the people, but now having an overview of what's being offered gives us the opportunity to exchange information on that and learn from each other, calibrate our own approach. If I look personally as the director of the center at the identified barriers and the opportunities, very recognizable, and they provide real food for thought. And finally, the follow-on work that Charles is hinting at, I think, would be very valuable, and we need to think about what we can do for all providers of philanthropy education. For example, the further exploration of issues, the curricular guidelines, the course reader for students. I think there's a very interesting and valuable piece of work to be done. And that brings me to the questions I would like to ask Charles, and to get his personal perspective on these things, having looked at philanthropic education more extensively. The first question is philanthropy sufficiently distinctive as a field and a vocation to be taught at universities in degree programs? And should those programs then be reflective, broad, or should they be skills-based, how-to, vocational, or interest-based? And by interest-based, I mean, for example, looking at human rights or looking at international development, in contrast to being skills-based. Second question is there a student market for philanthropy, undergraduate and degree programs in Europe? Are there enough students that are willing to sign up for these programs? And will there be? And most importantly is, will there be a market for the graduates from these programs? Because one will not come about without the other. And my final question to Charles would be, how can a dialogue be structured between the philanthropic sector and academic leadership so universities and centers can clarify the value added and stimulate demand, and on the other hand, so the philanthropic sector can clarify its interest and its needs and provide opportunities to collaborate?
Thank you very much, Michiel.
Back to you, Andrea.
I would actually invite Charles to go through these questions based on your research. What did you, based on your research and your opinion, of course, I would actually invite you to see if we can start finding an answer to some of these questions, and I would invite everybody listening if anybody has anything to add, please let us know. Charles.
As Andreas says, please do send in your questions. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on both of our presentations. And thank you, Mikhail, for your very interesting, insightful map and picture that you provided of life at the ERASMUS Center. In answer to your first question, is philanthropy sufficiently distinctive as a field and a vocation to be taught? I think that the space between the state and the market is sufficiently distinctive as a field to be taught. Within that, there's different conceptual frames that I would say at the moment are jostling for position as maybe the authoritative or dominant frame. And we've seen third sector studies, non-profit management, civil society studies, civil society being a space, and philanthropy. I believe there is a distinctive space for philanthropy as the frame, in that it encompasses many of the elements of the other frames that I described, although not all of them. And if you look at it or imagine it as a Venn diagram, one might have different views about how philanthropy could be characterized within that space. And I guess it also depends on the different meanings and definitions one has of philanthropy across Europe, whether you have an expansive or a narrow definition. But I believe that it is a field, and I do believe there are vocational elements to life as a foundation sector practitioner. So yes, but the extent to which that will emerge will depend over time on the levels of engagement that are shown between the universities and the wider foundation sector. And that really relates to your last question about how that conversation and dialogue is structured and developed, and we can return to that. As for whether the program should be reflective, skills-based, interest-based, I think it also raises an underlying question, and that is, what are the drivers for the development of those programs? If they are driven within pure academic disciplines and disciplinary settings, then the drivers will be more, if you like, academic-based, and they'll set the agenda according to maybe more theoretical or abstract needs. But if there's an interaction, and if that space is mediated via centers like your own, with links to the practitioner world and the academic world, we may begin to become attuned to what are the interests and needs of a variety of audiences and interested parties, which may lead to an answer to that question in kind of empirical terms. Personally, I think it would be a shame if the scope of focus of philanthropy education was too narrow to simply be there to serve practitioners. But at the same time, I also feel that if it was only academic focused, something would be missing. And therefore, I think that one would want a scenario where there was both and, if you like. But of course, that's easier said than done, and there are a number of challenges to achieving it. But I certainly would like to see an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary arrangement emerge, or constellation across and within different European countries and universities. And with the map that we now have, I'm sure there's potential for collaboration. As for student demand for undergraduate degrees and programs, I think the perception that I heard during the research is that that demand is unproven or uncertain. Having said that, I think there's a difference between demand for individual elective courses and a demand for a degree program. And it may be that an incremental approach will be the most useful at this moment, whereby one begins to develop course provision, including through the use of course readers, curricula, building up the capacity, convening different course instructors, and from there being able to test the demand, which I suspect would be there if you have good enough and interested enough academics who are focused on the subject, providing engaging teaching on the subject material, and will attract students who also want to go into careers in the non-profit or philanthropic sector. And that relates to your other question. Is there a market for graduates? Is there, if you like, a teach first for philanthropy? Those people that really want to be leaders in their own field that can see working in foundations as a viable option. When I joined the Pears Foundation in 2004, it was very hard to know what this space that I'd emerged in was. But I think that from my vantage point at Stanford and in America, where in our philanthropy class, students were on scholarships to go after the course that they'd taken at Stanford to work in some of the big foundations. There are now graduates of ours at Ford, MacArthur, and Rockefeller, and many of those students were focusing on philanthropy and foundations in a way that they hadn't previously, and had excited their interest in the potential that foundations have to address social issues. And I think that will also require interest and involvement from the foundation community across Europe to invest in various models, maybe to try and test different approaches to engaging with the universities. And that leads me to the answer, to try and answer your final question about how to structure the dialogue. I don't think it's any secret that there's been a gap between the academic and practitioner communities, and sometimes mutual suspicion, at least in the UK context. I hope that can now be overcome. I hope that we now have a map or a roadmap to maybe more constructive dialogue. And with that, and with people like Mikhail doing the work that he is doing, and other colleagues in centres across Europe, we now have an opportunity to develop something that's distinctive, that's European in scope and focus, and then talk to our colleagues in other parts of the world, including the US. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the potential to grow and develop philanthropy education. I hope that answers the questions, but I look forward to your thoughts on that.
Michiel, did that answer?
Yeah, I think those are yes, absolutely. Yes. And at least it's a very good start for the next phase of the discussion, because I think this will require much more deliberation and further probing, also with both parties and with academic leadership. But at least we now have a very firm basis to start that next phase from. So thank you for that.
I still invite anybody who wants to send in questions from the audience to type them in, and it will be very happy to share them with the with our speakers. Charles, I had a question, a question linked to your personal experience as a director of a foundation. As you were working in the field, directly working in the field, how much did you feel the need for more students coming from a specific education that had to do with your field of work? Did you feel any kind of lack in this field? Would you have wished that more students had come out of university with a clearer knowledge of what the philanthropy sector was like, or not?
Well, we had a relatively small staff at the Family Foundation, at the Pears Foundation, although as we grew and recruited, it was certainly an advantage for when we talked to potential employees that they were conversant with, the discourse around philanthropy and foundations, or were willing to learn. I wouldn't say it was a central factor in recruitment decisions, but it could be the case that those people that want to develop their skills within foundations should be supported to do so. And that could be where postgraduate master's programs could also be useful as training, as the how-to approaches that Mikhail mentioned that could tap into markets of both philanthropists and philanthropy foundation professionals. So yes, it was relevant. For me personally, I wanted to know that with the resources at our disposal, which amounted to 10 to 12 million euros a year by the time I left, that we were using those resources as well as possible. And that really meant trying to tap into expertise on the subject. And we found that sometimes there was subject expertise, but not necessarily understanding of the vantage point that we had as foundations and the particular challenges and dilemmas that created. So I really welcome the emphasis on tools that will equip practitioners to address these questions more that ECSP and others are offering.
Thank you very much. We are really running out of time, so I would invite both of you. We actually have a question coming from the audience. The question is, consultants and managers have burdened philanthropy practice with a tremendous amount of jargon. Do you think that rigorous academic approaches can be a remedy for this? So this question is for both of you. Do you think that if there's an academic framework, this could regulate the jargon that is burdening the field of philanthropy? Charles, what do you think?
I think it's really interesting. I think that's, it's true that there is jargon, and maybe with the professionalization of any field, there is that risk. I think academia, whilst it's not free of jargon itself, could be helpful because it could help clarify some of the debates, the language that's used. It could provide more analytical rigor to some of the discussions that take place on a variety of subjects. And over time, and if done well, it may help provide more clarity and more illumination on the subject. So my short answer would be yes.
Michiel, how do you see this? Do you agree with Charles?
Well, I would fully agree with Charles with his remark that academia also has its own jargon. And having been a consultant myself a long time ago, I know this problem, and it's something that both academics and consultants should be really aware of. And in terms of academics using jargon themselves, we see our role as a bridge between academia and practitioners, almost literally also as a translator. And this probably goes both ways, but to be able to translate the new knowledge, the paradigms, the formats, the frameworks into instruments and papers and training materials that are really understandable and that are being stripped from the jargon and translated into materials that practitioners can really understand. That doesn't say anything about the value of what comes out of academia, because the fundamental thinking and the applied thinking, I think, is extremely useful. But there is a translation step that needs to be taken to get the two parties together and help them understand each other.
Thank you very much. We are really running out of time, so I wanted to thank you both for participating, and I wanted to share with the audience before we go some more information of where further information on our activities can be found. The first link is to Charles' blog, Facing Philanthropy. On this blog, you will find a link to the full report, the full study that we just presented. On www.ecsp.nl, you will find more information about the activities of the Erasmus Center for Strategic Philanthropy. And for any complaints of any kind, please feel free to report directly back to me at the European Foundation Center. I want to thank everybody, thank the participants once again, and thank our speakers. We will be sharing the slides with you at the end of the webinar. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send them to us. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.